What if I told you that the darkest moment of your life, when you feel completely abandoned and forgotten, is actually the precise moment when the most powerful transformation becomes possible? Imagine experiencing such overwhelming depression that you literally feel like you're dying, convinced that God has turned his back on you forever, while your enemies celebrate your downfall. Most people in this situation either give up entirely or fake happiness to avoid appearing weak. But what if there's a third option that seems impossible but actually works, a psychological and spiritual breakthrough so dramatic that it transforms despair into unshakable joy in less than 60 seconds? Right now, millions of people are trapped in cycles of depression, feeling forgotten by God and defeated by life. But they'll never discover the ancient secret that can revolutionize their emotional state instantly. Today, you're about to learn not just sophisticated English vocabulary for describing the deepest human emotions, but you're going to witness the most rapid psychological transformation ever recorded, and understand why sometimes our greatest breakthroughs happen when we're brave enough to be brutally honest about our darkest feelings. David opens Psalm 13 with 4 devastating questions that reveal the depth of his despair. "O Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever. How long will you look the other way?" The repetition of "how long" 4 times in these verses creates what we call an aphora, a rhetorical device that emphasizes frustration and desperate urgency. When someone asks how long repeatedly, they're not seeking information but expressing emotional exhaustion with an unbearable situation. The word "forget" doesn't mean God can't remember David, it means God seems to be ignoring him completely, like forgetting someone exists. When someone forgets you in this sense, they act as if you don't matter and your needs are irrelevant. The question "forever" shows David's fear that this abandonment might be permanent, not just temporary neglect, but eternal rejection. The phrase "look the other way" means to deliberately ignore something you should pay attention to. When someone looks the other way, they're choosing not to see what's happening, either from indifference or inability to help. David's emotional inventory becomes even more intense. "How long must I struggle with anguish in my soul, with sorrow in my heart every day? How long will my enemy have the upper hand?" The word "struggle" implies ongoing, exhausting effort, not just feeling bad, but actively fighting against overwhelming emotions. When someone struggles with something, they're engaged in continuous, difficult battle that drains their energy. The word "anguish" describes intense emotional pain, deeper than sadness. It's the kind of pain that makes you feel physically sick. When someone experiences anguish, they're tormented by feelings so intense they can barely function. The phrase "in my soul" indicates this pain affects David's deepest, most essential self, not just surface emotions but his core identity and spiritual foundation. The parallel "sorrow in my heart every day" emphasizes the relentless, daily nature of this suffering. When sorrow is every day, it means there's no relief or break from the emotional pain. David's desperation peaks with a stark ultimatum: "Turn and answer me, O Lord my God. Restore the sparkle to my eyes, or I will die." The command "turn and answer me" demands immediate divine attention and response. When someone turns toward you, they stop what they're doing and focus completely on your situation. The beautiful phrase "restore the sparkle to my eyes" uses poetic language to describe the loss of life and joy. When someone's eyes have lost their sparkle, they look dull, lifeless, and defeated. You can see the depression and hopelessness in their expression. The phrase "or I will die" presents a stark alternative. Either God intervenes, or David won't survive. This isn't just metaphorical death, but the real possibility that depression and despair will literally kill him. David explains why divine intervention is urgent. "Don't let my enemies gloat, saying, 'We have defeated him.' Don't let them rejoice at my downfall. The word gloat describes taking malicious pleasure in someone else's misfortune. When someone gloats, they don't just enjoy your failure, they celebrate it publicly and cruelly. The phrase, "we have defeated him," shows that David's enemies will claim credit for his destruction, treating his suffering as their victory. The word rejoice means to express great happiness and celebration. David's concern isn't just personal survival, but preventing his enemies from using his defeat to mock God's power and faithfulness. Then suddenly, dramatically, everything changes in just 2 verses, one of the most remarkable emotional reversals in all literature. "But I trust in your unfailing love. I will rejoice because you have rescued me." The word "but" creates an absolute contrast between despair and hope, between feeling forgotten and trusting completely. This isn't gradual improvement, but instant transformation. The phrase "unfailing love" describes love that never stops, never weakens, and never disappoints. When something is unfailing, it's completely reliable and will never let you down. The declaration, "I will rejoice," is stunning. David has moved from wanting to die to promising to celebrate. The phrase "you have rescued me" uses past tense, even though the rescue may still be future. David speaks with such confidence that he describes his deliverance as already accomplished. The transformation completes with a promise of worship. "I will sing to the Lord because he is good to me." The promise to sing indicates joyful, public celebration, not just private relief, but enthusiastic worship that others will hear. The phrase "he is good to me" reflects David's renewed confidence in God's benevolent character and personal care. When someone is good to you, they treat you with kindness, generosity, and love. This dramatic reversal teaches us the secret I mentioned at the beginning. Sometimes the fastest way out of depression is through it, not around it. David didn't achieve breakthrough by denying his feelings or pretending everything was fine. Instead, he expressed his darkest thoughts with complete honesty, and this brutal authenticity somehow opened the door to supernatural transformation. But David's individual breakthrough connects to a larger pattern that he describes in Psalm 14, which reveals why depression often feels so overwhelming in our current world. David begins Psalm 14 with one of the most controversial statements in Scripture. "Only fools say in their hearts, 'There is no God.'" The word "fools" in Hebrew doesn't mean intellectually stupid, but morally corrupt. People who make decisions based on selfish desires rather than wisdom and truth. When someone is a fool in biblical terms, they're not lacking intelligence, but lacking moral judgment. The phrase "say in their hearts" refers to internal conviction, not just public statements. When someone says something in their heart, they truly believe it and base their life decisions on that belief. David isn't talking about intellectual atheists who've studied philosophy, but about people who live as if God doesn't exist because it's more convenient for their lifestyle. David describes the moral consequences of functional atheism. They are corrupt, and their actions are evil. Not one of them does good. The word "corrupt" means morally rotten or spoiled, like food that has gone bad and become toxic. When someone is corrupt, their moral character has deteriorated and become harmful to others. The phrase "not one of them does good" seems like an exaggeration. But David is describing the logical outcome of living without divine moral standards when there's no absolute right and wrong. Everything becomes relative and self-serving. David presents God's perspective from heaven. The Lord looks down from heaven on the entire human race. He looks to see if anyone is truly wise, if anyone seeks God. The phrase "looks down from heaven" presents God's cosmic perspective. He can see all of humanity simultaneously and evaluate their spiritual condition. The word "wise" refers to people who make good decisions based on understanding truth and moral principles. The phrase "seeks God" describes active spiritual pursuit, not just believing God exists, but actually trying to know Him personally and follow His guidance. God's assessment is sobering, but no, all have turned away. All have become corrupt. No one does good, not a single one. This universal diagnosis explains why individual depression often feels so overwhelming. We're living in a world where moral corruption has become normalized and even celebrated. When all have turned away, it means humanity as a whole has rejected divine guidance and moral standards. The repetition, "no one does good, not a single one," emphasizes the comprehensive nature of this moral failure. David describes the practical consequences of this spiritual blindness. "Will those who do evil never learn? They eat up my people like bread and wouldn't think of praying to the Lord." The rhetorical question, "will they never learn?" expresses frustration with people who refuse to acknowledge the consequences of their actions. The metaphor, "eat up my people like bread," compares oppression to casual consumption. They devour vulnerable people as easily and thoughtlessly as eating a meal. The phrase, "wouldn't think of praying," shows their complete disconnection from spiritual reality. Prayer doesn't even occur to them as a possibility. But David promises that divine justice will eventually manifest. Terror will grip them, for God is with those who obey him. The word terror describes overwhelming fear and panic. When terror grips someone, they're paralyzed by sudden realization of their vulnerability and danger. The phrase, "God is with those who obey him," reveals why the wicked will experience terror. They'll discover that their victims have divine protection and backing. David concludes both Psalms with hope for ultimate restoration. The wicked frustrate the plans of the oppressed, but the Lord will protect his people. Who will come from Mount Zion to rescue Israel? When the Lord restores his people, Jacob will shout with joy, and Israel will rejoice. The word frustrate means to prevent someone from achieving their goals and dreams. When someone frustrates your plans, they create obstacles and interference that stop you from succeeding. But David promises divine protection that will ultimately overcome all human opposition. The reference to Mount Zion points to God's earthly headquarters and the source of divine intervention. The promise of restoration leads to shouting with joy and rejoicing. The same emotional transformation David experienced personally becomes the destiny of all God's people. This dual psalm reveals why depression feels so overwhelming in our current world. We're surrounded by moral corruption and functional atheism that creates a toxic environment for sensitive, godly people. But it also shows us the pathway to breakthrough. Brutal honesty about our darkest feelings, combined with stubborn trust in God's unfailing love. David's rapid transformation from suicidal despair to joyful worship isn't a one-time miracle, but a pattern available to anyone brave enough to pour out their heart. Honestly, while clinging to divine promises, sometimes our greatest breakthroughs happen not when we deny our darkness, but when we drag it into the light and discover that God's love is stronger than our deepest despair.